Welcome back to Chapter 15. This is Part B, wherein we will be talking about metadiscursive strategies for improving your writing. Let's dive in with a refresher of what we mean by metadiscourse. You'll remember that metadiscourse is the author commenting on his or her own sentence. These are guides for the reader for the extra textual message. We talked a lot about the sentence modifier clearly as a great example of metadiscourse. If I said something like, "Clearly you had to rush out of the house," I'm implying a little extra something through my use of clearly and kind of reading you and saying, wow, it really looks like you had to rush out of the house. You can also use metadiscourse by hedging. So if I say something like, "You may have had trouble with that last exercise. You probably found it difficult." I'm hedging. I suspect that you had trouble, but I don't want to go all the way to assume that, yeah, you totally had trouble. So words like fairly, could, might, perhaps, at times, sometimes, almost, and usually allow you to hedge a little bit. When we're talking about writing with style, we have to recognize that we always include our own style in writing. It's just a factor that exists. You can't write without including your own style. Some very obvious stylistic choices are things like metaphor and personification, but some of the more common choices you're usually not going to recognize. Such as in the previous sentence, I moved the direct object to the front of the sentence. Let's look at it again. Some of the more common choices you don't usually recognize. Ooh, I flipped things around. You don't usually recognize some of the more common choices would be the standard order for that sentence. And so adding the direct object as a clause opening the sentence is one way to use word order variation. Dickens, of course, gives us a more dramatic example. Talent, Mr. Micawber has. Money, Mr. Micawber has not. So we are making sure that the verb, the having or not having, is getting the end focus here. The contrast is elevated. Let's talk a little bit about ellipses and the coordinate series. So when we say ellipses here, we don't mean ... We mean the deliberate eliding of certain sentence features to make things jazzier. These are not always 100% strictly grammatical, but they do add some flair to your writing. Be aware of the context in which you are attempting to add these things. So I think, and your authors agree, that one thing you can do is to elide certain coordinating conjunctions. Look at these three examples. Cassidy's hobbies include napping, chewing, and panting. So in that example, I'm using the Oxford comma, napping, comma, chewing, comma, and panting. It's very clear that I don't think Cassidy is chewing and panting at the same time. In example B, Cassidy's hobbies include napping and chewing and panting. We are sort of suggesting equal interest on Cassidy's part in each of the three hobbies. And in the third example, Cassidy's hobbies include napping, chewing, panting. It seems like through our elision of coordinating conjunctions altogether that the list is open-ended, right? And Cassidy's hobbies just go on and on and on. Let's talk about an introductory appositive series. Sometimes writers will use more than one appositive to start a sentence off, such as faithful companions, eager playmates, good listeners, bulldogs are all these things and more. Sometimes the appositives are in opposition to a pronoun. Plans, dreams, hopes, fears, they were all bound together in that instance, so the they is the pronoun to which all of those nouns are in apposition. This is just another stylistic, jazzy way to start off your sentence. Another stylistic choice is the deliberate sentence fragment. You are playing with fire with the deliberate sentence fragment. This really cool paragraph by Sandra Cisneros illustrates what, in my opinion, is an extremely effective use of the sentence fragment. It is talking about a very, disturbing experience in the life of a character in the story, and all these fragments sort of contribute to the fragmentary sense of understanding that she has of the event. But if you are using fragments in a formal paper where this sort of style is not usually encouraged, I think you will find that you are not going to have them as well received as you might have expected. So just know your audience. Know when fragments are acceptable and not. Let's talk a little bit about repetition and the antithetical sentence. Both of these stylistic features can be effective if you use them in moderation. Lincoln's famous example, government of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is a different impact than just saying of, by, and for the people, right? The repetition of people 3 times really puts the stress on the people, that idea that Lincoln is going for. Antithetical sentences are going to bring contrasting ideas right next to each other. Here's one from an article I read recently about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Ophelia's diligent nature and Dinah's dilatory one show the range of domesticity in the text. So diligent, hardworking, dilatory, lazy. These 2 antithetical elements are brought right up next to each other. Again, one of the most famous examples comes from Dickens. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, etc., etc., etc. Feel free to review this kind of amazing opening sentence on your own. We're not all Dickens, we're not all going to be able to pull off quite so many antithetical repetitions, but a few here and there can add some flavor and punch to your writing. Let's finish up with our discussion of how to use gender appropriately. Chapter 14 introduced the concept of the singular they, and the text noted at that time that they in writing is not widely accepted. While it is in speech accepted, it's not acceptable in writing. And I think your authors are quite delightful here, saying that if your rhetorical situation requires a conservative approach, you may want to develop a repertoire of options. Okay, so let's pretend that you are in a conservative rhetorical situation. Here are 6 strategies you can use. Well, there's the plural. This is pretty straightforward. Each student should be aware of the impact pronouns have when he writes. Revise it to simply be students should be aware of the impact pronouns have when they write. You could use he or she, but I wouldn't do this too many times. It sounds a little clunky. Each doctor must choose how he wants to practice medicine becomes each doctor must choose how he or she wants to practice medicine, or perhaps she or he wants to practice medicine. You can also use some more sophisticated strategies. That's what we're going to look at now. The third more sophisticated strategy is making a clause into a verb phrase. So for example, every student should be aware of the impact pronouns have becomes every student should be aware of the impact pronouns have when writing. So instead of when he writes, it becomes when writing. The pronoun problem is gone. Give it a try with this sentence. Each runner must be cognizant of terrain conditions when he runs. We also have the strategy of avoiding his as a determiner. For example, the commentator should have kept his opinion out of the news report becomes one of 2 options. You could use a different determiner. That's what I've done in revision 1. The commentator should have kept all opinion out of the news report. Or you could just use no determiner at all. The commentator should have kept opinion out of the news report. Ooh, sneaky. Avoiding using his as a determiner. Here's another grammatical shift that you can use. Turn the adverbial clause into a relative clause. For example, when a swimmer has poor technique, he should work diligently to improve. I've revised it. A swimmer who has poor technique should work diligently to improve. Notice a swimmer who has poor technique is a relative clause. Give it a try on your own. When an auditor visits a facility, he must take care to not frighten the employees. How would you revise it? And our final strategy, strategy 6, is simply to change the point of view. I, again, am not wild about this, but here's how it would work. Every student should be aware of the vacation schedule before he plans his holiday breaks. You could change it to the second person. You should be aware of the vacation schedule before you plan your holiday breaks. To me, this sounds a little bit like you're yelling at someone. Or revise it to the first person plural. We should be aware of the vacation schedule before we plan our holiday breaks. And for me, again, this is a little bit like don't tell me what to do, right? Don't lump me in with you. How do you know that I haven't looked at the vacation schedule? Your composition teacher is probably not going to like this very much, is what I'm suggesting. So perhaps stick to the other 5 strategies. Congratulations, you did it! And you earned both bulldogs. This is the end of our grammar course. Congratulations on all your hard work. Keep it up as you prep for the final. Butch and Cassidy are very proud of you. Talk to you soon.